All right. Happy Friday, everyone. We are back with Learning Tech Talks again, where we are exploring the landscape. But today we're not exploring the landscape of learning technology. This is a very different episode. But anyway, we are demystifying something technical that I think everybody's going to get some benefit out of because it's digital transformation, which, if you have not heard that term, I don't know where you have been the last 10 years. But anyway, that's what we're talking about today. And today I am talking with Aurimas. He's the president of DevBridge. I'm not going to try and pronounce your last name because I know I will
It's all
butcher
good.
it. I will. So how do you pronounce it, though? I have to ask.
It's Aurimas Adomavicius.
Okay, Aurimas. All right. I probably will even have to just guess on the first name.
It's
But
all
anyway,
good.
so we're going to be digging into digital transformation. I'm really looking forward to it. You don't come from a learning and development background, which is exactly what I wanted for this conversation, so that we could really articulate the differences in how we can think about this. But we're really going to unpack this one. But before we get into it, we got to warm up the audience. We got to get everybody involved, make this fun and participative. So everybody watching, you can play along in the comments as well. But let's start with you, Aurimas. Where are you in the world today? And I know the answer to this, and it's not at home. So let's hear it.
No, I'm in Vail, Colorado. We family and we escaped for a mid-season ski trip to enjoy a little bit of powder, and today is my last day. We're flying back later today to Chicago, and I haven't broken anything, so it's been a really good trip because I've done the other thing before.
Okay, and if I remember right, you're a snowboarder, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, you're a boarder. So am I, right? I years ago I picked up snowboarding, and I feel like once you go snowboarding, you can't go back. The only thing is, to the injury piece, I can just literally feel that piece where you catch your front edge and you bam on your chest, and you feel like you've just been snapped in half. Not fun. And the last time I went, go for it.
It is. You're absolutely right. It's very punishing. Right? I think it's very punishing in the beginning, especially if you're learning as an adult, which is what I did. I learned it in my early 30s. I survived the learning, but there were a few broken wrists along the way.
I remember one. It wasn't that, and again, we won't tell too many stories, but it was not the last time. But one of the last times I went, I was with a friend, and he did that. Caught the front edge, face planted, and when he rolled over, you could see his collarbone stick out of his jacket. And I remember, Anyway, we won't go into that. All right. Anyway,
no.
I'm where I always am, Waukesha, Wisconsin. It is a balmy -2 degrees this morning, so it is great. We got some snow last night, but anyway, let's shift gears into our icebreaker question. We're out of that piece. This one is a little bit relevant to the topic. Sometimes I just go out of left field and do something fun. This one's a little bit closer to the topic, but I'm really curious from your end, what was a transformation that you expected it to go one way and it just did not? It completely went in a very different direction.
Yeah. What comes to mind is an organization in Canada. It's actually a tier 1 bank in Canada that was and continues to be actually a long-term client of ours. And when organizations start thinking about a transformation, I don't even know if you look back, just to kind of give it a little bit of historical context, if you look back at how technology permeates everything that we do, organizations didn't start talking about, well, we need to transform. People said, well, can we try Agile? That was the first thing. All right, now we're doing Agile. Well, should we integrate design into the way that we work? Okay, maybe we should integrate design. Should we become product centric, right? And so all of these different flavors of capabilities start injecting themselves into day-to-day business. And long term, if you look at what it is now, people now start using that nomenclature of digital transformation, which really means is
all-encompassing.
We're effectively using technology to service our customers, to enable the business to digitize our processes and things like that. Now, so when we start working with our client, I mean, for them, it's primarily around agile enablement and being able to get things done faster and get it out to market quicker. And we came in, we essentially were able to ship a mobile banking a mobile banking experience, right? So mobile, being able to,
yeah. Which I remember that's been a big thing for the banking industry, was taking it from brick and
yeah,
mortar to mobile.
yeah. And so we're able to help these guys take an experience out to market in the Caribbean for a subsidiary bank, to take it to market in 6 months, which for them it's unheard of. They typically, their programs would last 2 to 5 years to get any type of initiative rolled out, which again is an indication of an organization that is not necessarily using like nimble ways of addressing market
You mean that's
needs.
not
Or
agile? 2 to 5 years?
yeah. But we're able to do this one initiative, and then the stakeholders at the bank go, well, okay, so you guys were really successful in this isolated instance. Let's try to adopt this to the wider bank. And we start going through this process. And if you think about a digital transformation, there's usually a few kind of building blocks that you need to implement. So there's when we talk about transformation, we talk about the people, the process, and the tooling. Yep. So you need to make sure that your people kind of have the right knowledge, the right skill set. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And then you need to make sure you roll out the appropriate process to do what you want to do, and then 100%. We start doing this, and we start doing this across multiple programs. And what we find out, and what is kind of interesting, is that financial institutions, and especially tier 1 banks, and I have not seen one yet, are incredibly hierarchical and unwilling to change those fundamental structures that make the bank work. Right? It's actually in
it's
the
not
financial
only banks, but I completely believe
yeah.
in tier 1 banks.
Yep. And so for them, actually, preservation of the status quo is, I'd say, genetically more appealing than change, because change means that people's titles will change, roles will change. And because even if you look at these larger institutions, right, a lot of the structure is actually built in a way where retaining an employee for a 30-year period and actually having them develop in that same organization and then retire with the benefits of that organization are the underpinnings of why those organizations work. And the moment you start saying that, we're going to actually have to retrain or replace a significant portion of your staff because they're unwilling to change,
you start, you're poking the bear. You start, big time.
Yep. And there's another downside to that, right? Or another, I'd say, artifact that surfaces in those types of organizations is that it's a command and control management style. So it's senior down to the front lines. You tell what should happen, and then you make sure that your soldiers follow your direction. You look at the product world and you look at a digitally transformed organization, it's the other way around. It's actually the way they should work is bottom up. It's independent, empowered teams able to do what they need to do and actually take learnings from the front lines of the business, and then create programs and products that change the organization bottom up. But again, you need to change leadership. You need to change the values in the organization, the reporting structure. So institutional organizations usually really, really struggle with that. And we still work with our client, but they still, they use an amalgamation of being product centric with all kinds of constraints that the organization has put in place.
Okay. All right. Well, I have no doubt we're going to dig more into that and what that looks like with this one. So I'll share mine briefly, and then I have my kind of first what I want to dive into with this. So this one will actually relate to the brief conversation we had before we went live a little bit. So early in my career, I was helping implement medical software for healthcare. And the way we used to do it was very traditional. We'd send a trainer and they would be there and they would do all the training. They were just kind of on site. And I said, this just isn't effective. This isn't effective to have somebody there, because once they leave, everything goes with them. Mm-hmm. So I initially just decided to flip the whole thing on its head and do everything digitally, right? We'll digitally transform this. So I won't tell you the mistakes I made until I tell the story of what happened. And then I think it'll start to play out. So the very first client that we took to this, day one go live, nobody's there. I said, we don't need anybody there. It was a mess. It was an absolute hot mess. If you're not familiar with healthcare systems, when they're changing their whole software system,
Yeah.
it's like lighting a house on fire with gasoline. I mean, it's chaos. So needless to say, I learned very quickly that there are certain moments, there were certain moments in there where even though that person there wasn't necessarily doing anything all the time, the comfort that it brought was addressing a non-performance necessarily based issue, but we had to do that. Now, granted, we pivoted and evolved and structured it, and we actually did continue to move forward with almost a no on-site trainer type approach, but we did find those core moments where we said, this requires a person's physical presence to be able to do what we need to do. Now, again, we were doing it based on what the outcome was versus, we just need to have someone there. Like we actually thought about what and why. So anyway, needless to say, digital transformation can be great, but again, I've gotten kicked in the teeth more than once.
Yeah. Okay. With the healthcare systems too, and I've observed this as I go to see my primary care physician, and there's these are complex systems, right? These are complex systems because of the domain. They're complex because of the I'd say the multitudinal way in which an interaction can happen with a patient. There's different, depending on where you take it, right? It could be a sore throat, it could be a broken limb, it could be et cetera, et cetera. So these systems, when you talk about patient care and you need to diagnose, you need to track, you need to report, and so on, their complexity escalates almost geometrically. What I haven't seen being done in the healthcare space, and when I look at these systems, is they're all designed from the perspective of the illness or the treatment, as opposed to from the perspective of the user that's going to have to be interacting with this platform. And as you were saying about training and switching out a platform and having people to become comfortable with it, I have yet to see any of those platforms be welcoming from a perspective of a new doctor that's stepping into that experience, right? Yep. And I think it's a huge area of opportunity, and I don't think anyone's acting on it right now. Everyone's starting with, here's the end state of the complexity. Here are all of the different parameters we may need to track or log about a patient, and here's a screen with 50 bazillion fields for you to be able to fill out. No one's really looking, again, because a doctor is, they're not necessarily the customer, but for that piece of software, the doctor is the end user. Yes. And no one's building those systems with a user-centric approach where they would validate and test it with that doctor to make that experience better and smoother and so on. So.
Yeah, it certainly is an area of opportunity, especially. I mean, I think it's an area of opportunity in healthcare. I've seen it in plenty other industries as well. But again, I think that point really stands.
Yeah, I can give you, or I can tell you a war story about this. We have a client. The client, what they do is they have a network of 10,000 physicians and nurses, and they provide staffing and scheduling services. And they do some other stuff. They do actual patient care. They do facility management, et cetera, et cetera. But essentially, they work with a hospital network all over the U.S. And then for their emergency rooms, they provide the scheduling and the staffing of physicians and nurses as things kind of shift rapidly. So, for example, if a doctor gets sick, they're able to provide an alternative doctor for that ER, right? And,
to be able to
on a moment. Exactly. So this business, they build this business essentially doing all of this work through Excel documents, calling people. So really picking up a phone saying, "Hey, Joe, are you available for tonight? Mark got sick. We need to swap him out," because you can't have an ER unstaffed because someone with a broken wrist may come in. So they do this all manually. Now, when we start working with them a good 5-6 years ago, they don't even know where to get started. And this is the reason why I'm telling you this is it's an example of I would say a successful transformation exercise in a transformation kind of life cycle. So they say, well, we don't really know what we need to do. We just know that we have a lot of manual processes. We have 10,000 constituents in our system that we need to make sure they're staffed, they're working, and so on and so forth. And we have a lot of overhead in the way that we run these processes internally. So the first thing that we do, and a really good way for anyone looking to get into this or start doing this,
how to get started with a digital
Yep.
Because clearly they had articulated this is an issue. We just aren't quite sure what to do about it. We know it's this. We know it's messy. We know it's kind of a chaotic mess, but we're not sure where even to start.
Yep. And it's in those instances, right? It's you're exactly right. There's a pressing business need, but the outcome is not necessarily identified. So you don't know where to invest this money, or you may have 15 different opportunities to invest money into different applications. So how do you figure out what you need to do?
So asking what you want, what does good look like, isn't necessarily, you might not be at a point where they can even really articulate that.
Yeah. Because again, with any of these, with any transformation going from an analog process to a digitized process, you've never been there before. So as a business, you're really just trying to project into the future. So anyway, so a really good tool, an approach to use in this it's called a service design exercise.
Okay.
And a service design exercise, what it does is, and actually, while I'm talking, I'll even look for an example that I can show you because I think it's going to be pretty impactful. But what you do with a service design exercise is you actually map out all of the interactions for a particular workflow on a horizontal. So here, let me show this to you right now. I'll share it. 1 second. Let me share my screen. There we go. So if you look at that little chart on the right bottom, you map out a workflow at the top in that top row. So you say, from a perspective of for example, from a perspective of a physician that is looking for a shift, here are all of the steps that typically happen for that physician to become allocated to a shift. But then, in addition to that experience for your target persona or your target customer, on those layers that are below, you actually map out all of the business processes for the front office, back office, dependencies, systems that are currently being used to actually
this down into the deeper complexities of what it actually takes. Because you may say, "Oh, this happens."
Yep.
Yes, but what
that's exactly it.
Actually making that happen?
Exactly. So you're essentially you're not only you're looking at the user workflow on that blue top layer, but you're looking at all of the, like you said, I like the word, all of those trickle down processes and triggers that happen in an organization to make that transaction work, right? But you do this not for a future state, you do this for current state of business, right? So this is the way that you run the business.
True visibility into what that gives you true visibility into this. Now, one of the follow-up questions I have on this, because it's an approach I've taken similarly when we've tried to do this, because again, if you don't know what really is going in, what you're doing today, it becomes extremely difficult to actually transform it, or you risk, at least what I've seen, you end up transforming things and you break them because you didn't actually understand that, that's actually all the different things that went into. But one of the things that I'm curious about is when you're doing this, sometimes in my experience, people don't always know. People don't necessarily know what goes into, they're like, well, I don't know what happens. So I'm curious how you've worked with organizations where, who are you including in those conversations? Because some people are just going through the motions. They're like, I don't know what happens. I just do this. And on the other end, the widget comes out and they don't realize there's 6 layers of complexity behind the scenes that are happening for them to get that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And in these workshops, in any service design workshop that you run, we usually make a determination of who needs to be present from three types of criteria. So one criteria is it needs to be an individual who's going to be paying for this. So if we need a sponsor, right? So if someone's, we need a sponsor because they're the ultimate authority on actually pulling the plug, for example, saying, no, we need to change this process because, and this is a cautionary tale, people do not want change. Even if it's good for them, people don't want change. So you need to have an authority that you can refer back to and say, listen, we know it's uncomfortable, but the future state is actually a better state. So we need to go there. So anyway, so there's a sponsor. Then we need people that are actively involved in doing, right? So that's effectively the
blue line. People that are in the blue line.
and even people who are maybe in those downstream processes. So if you're doing this type of workshop and you're thinking about a physician, you probably should have someone in that room who does onboarding for the physicians, because they'll know the onboarding workflows. But anyway, so the people who are doing, and then you also want the people who are going to solve this problem in the room. So you need a cross-functional product team that is actually going to be solutioning for the future state.
Yeah.
So those are the roles. Now back to the example. So we run this exercise, and we map out this whole manual process, right, of how these doctors get allocated to the shifts and so on. And we say, listen, this is the blueprint. Now, looking at this, what is the lowest hanging fruit to make it better, right? Whatever better is. Maybe it's just, automating some of these workflows so that maybe we can automatically onboard, maybe we can automatically assign people to shifts and things like that. And very quickly, we distill out of just looking at that map that if we allow doctors to have a mobile application where they see open shifts and they can opt into the shift, that saves like 70% of the burden of texting, calling, confirming, and not to mention you're in healthcare. So you're dealing with HIPAA, there's patient data, there's confidentiality. You don't want to do this over,
complexity of that, gets real messy real fast.
Yeah. So we identify a mobile app, and then to make the long story short, the mobile app gets rolled out. We look at the metrics of adoption for the mobile app, and we use the metrics of adoption for that initial product to justify additional rounds of investment to introduce other automation workflows into that organization. Fast forward to now, and we can dive in deeper if you want. Fast forward to now, they have 5 different tracks, 5 different products that digitize all of the experiences, from automated scheduling, automated onboarding, patient care. Then there's also the practice management component. So they took all facets of that business and they rolled out products using analytics and metrics to justify the investment into those products to actually make that whole business run on software. And so all of the manual processes, the faxing, the emailing, the texting, that went and got encapsulated into software that was made for them.
So I've got to ask this, because what's funny, I didn't say this back at the time, but the other thing that came to mind when you talked about not having the sponsor in the room is, and I've had this blow up in my face before, right? You do all this amazing work, you think you've got the problem solved, and then you go to the person who's the decision maker and they just go, no. Right? Yeah. And you're like, what? So I think,
and you know why it's really powerful to have them in, and it's not just to keep them informed. If one of the tips that I use for when we train our teams is, I say, the moment that you have an individual in the room, they start feeling that like they're contributing to the solution. So even if the solution is politicized inside the organization, if the stakeholder feels like they've contributed to the end state that is being proposed, they're now vested. They're vested emotionally and psychologically. There's ownership in that solution, as it were. And if they're not into it, what's going to happen, and we've seen this happen as well, you're going to get to a phase, maybe they even allow you to build it, and you build some kind of product. And the moment that the sponsor sees that product, they go, it doesn't have the bling. It's not snappy enough. And you're like,
I love the gesture.
Yeah, what the fuck are you talking about? And because they didn't have that.
That's not what I was thinking.
Yeah. So you want people contributing because they buy in.
So I have to ask this other piece, because I am curious your thoughts on this one too, is, when you think about this big complex map of all these different processes, and this is one of the things that I think I've found to be one of the bigger challenges. You talked about focusing in on the low-hanging fruit. But what I've seen sometimes, and if you don't navigate this can get out of hand real quick, is people can want to fix everything all at once. They can say, oh, let's just fix it all at the same time. And I'm curious, your take. Personally, I've found reining it back in and saying, let's fix something that we know we can do first. And then if we can find more, we'll add to that. But how have you approached that? Because I've seen that happen in meetings more than I can count.
Yeah. And I'll actually show you another really good. Yeah, let me share this and I'll show you. So it's really about prioritization, right? And actually, it's about understanding the pros and the cons in the different opportunities that you have in that transformation journey. and we're more right now, when we talk about transformation, we're talking about the resulting products that are an artifact of a transformation. We're not necessarily talking about all of the underpinnings of what needs to happen for the transformation to happen, but we'll come back to that. So let me share this.
We're actually talking about the thing.
We're talking about the thing, not the process that precedes the thing, right?
Yeah. You're using very technical terms right now.
Yeah, right. I know. So this is a good example of, a business will typically have multiple opportunities. And this is an example from the logistics space. So the logistics clients of ours identified that there's multiple things they can solve for. And the names are pretty self-explanatory, so you can see what they mean. The first thing that we typically do is we say, okay, can we assign a value to pursuing this opportunity, and then the downside of not pursuing, or the risk associated with not pursuing. And so we do, the upside is we're going to reduce fraud, and we're going to improve utilization by 20%. The downside is, well, we need to invest into hardware because we can't do this augmented reality warehouse application with the devices that we currently have, right? So this is one kind of I'd say one. So
yellow is good. That yellow is good.
Yellow's good. Red's bad. Yeah.
Okay. Very confusing because yellow's not right. Yellow's.
I know. These are brand colors, so that's why it's brand coded. Then the way say we identify 4 and we have those pros and cons identified. Then we say, okay, now for any given opportunity, do we have technical readiness? Do we have feasibility? And do we have value and priority clearly articulated? So, as an example, technical readiness could be, well, we're going to use big data, and everyone's jumping on big data like it's the next big thing. But the problem is, a lot of the times people haven't even started collecting data about their business, and they already want to get the learnings from that data. And we're like, well, that's from a technical readiness perspective. You're not ready.
We can start that process, but we can't execute against it yet. So you're outside the scope of technically ready.
Yep. Now, another thing that you should really do is this is like the 4 quadrants chart, and you essentially look at complexity of implementation and value for business. And you take those 4 opportunities, as I showed you in the few slides ago, and then you map them across those quadrants. And you say, well, if you have things that are high business value and are piece of cake implementation, you obviously probably should prioritize those as the first things that you do. Then on the flip side, you may also have risky and difficult implementation, but really high payback, right? So we say on the kind of the top 2 quadrants, those are the opportunities you probably should look at, and you probably should prioritize to implement.
Prioritize the ones that you can probably hit relatively quickly. Then the follow-up would be, these are going to be more complex. Now those could probably start or run in parallel a little bit.
Yeah, that's. So that's, so we would, looking at those 4 that we looked at before, we'd say, well, one of them we're going to kill, another one we're going to research because we don't have enough data to justify it. For the third one, we're going to do our proof of concept. And for the fourth one, we have all of the evidence that we need to actually go ahead and build this product and make, the experience better for everyone as a result. So that's to answer your question of, well, how do you pick, what do you do first, right?
Yeah. Well, because again, it's a lot of times the process, even if, and I have to imagine, because I've been in this seat before, where you may personally be in there as you're leading this transformation, you may already know where you need to take it, but you need to bring people along for the ride. And there has to be some degree of a process so that instead of just shooting somebody's idea down because they think it's great, and you say, well, let's actually walk this through the process. Let's figure out where it sits on the complexity and the value that it brings, so that instead of it feeling like we're just saying, we're going to kill this one, and people feel like it's personal. It's more of a process that you followed. So I like the structure that you've brought to it. And I think, again, one of the things that I liked about digital transformation and why I said we should do this episode, even though it's not learning, is that this process is transferable regardless. I mean, people in learning can follow this same type of thing. If you're looking at, all right, we're taking one of our programs from this to this, same exact model, same exact approach that you take to actually break it down and say, how do we actually approach this?
Yeah. And this is, I wanted to throw this on the screen because I think it's a good model to reference. We call this the product pyramid. And obviously the end state, right, or how should I say this, the desirable outcome, right, is to be effective at creating product and being customer centric. So we want to be able to be able to jump onto opportunities that are out there. We want the customer to be part of that conversation. We want to be fast and nimble in building an effective product, and this is purely related to digital transformation. But to do that, there are like underpinning components that you need to build into your organization. And this is where I mentioned to you before that we need to go back to like the fundamentals, right? Before we jump into the actual building the product.
Right.
Well, you need to build these fundamentals in, because without the fundamentals, you will have the challenges of the bank that I told you before. Because if from a value perspective, if your management believes that people need to be proactively managed and ushered into outcomes, as opposed to giving people the flexibility and the freedom to make mistakes and learn and recover and then become self-sufficient in the way that they operate in a cross-functional product team, you will constrain your progress. You will not get to this product-centric state if you don't have those underpinnings. And I don't know which one you want to dive in more, or if anything on here strikes your fancy.
One, and I have a question that came from an audience member that I'm going to bring in here. But what's funny is, looking at that visual that you have there, I almost could see that being, you could almost use the iceberg analogy again. Yeah. That's the one I think of. You see the product on the top, that's what's sticking out of the water that everybody sees and goes, oh, that's digital transformation. That's what we want to get to. And then the other 90% that's sitting underneath the water, that if you don't tackle that, that's really what can, completely destroy or make it a success, depending on how you handle it.
Absolutely. And a lot of the times, people try to cut corners, right? And they think that some of those components are not necessary. Like, another big one, right? So I mentioned values. There's organizational structure, and the challenge with organizational structure is that most companies are siloed in the way that they have their departments, I'd say, built out, right?
What?
Yeah, right.
I think I've never seen that in my entire career.
It's never happened. Yeah, exactly. So when the organization, when in general, through history, right, the way that business, let's say, evolved, IT became a capability at some point, I don't know, 60s, 70s, more actively, right? Like investment in general, just having technology started all the way back. So IT was a new thing. And so you had business, you had your IT group, you had your marketing group, you had your customer support group. But organizationally, they're all distributed ownership. It's all adversarial, and there's minimal collaboration between those groups, because the business owns the budget, but IT owns delivery. And so the business is going to hold IT hostage, because if they don't get what they need for themselves, the business will get blamed, right? The stakeholders will blame the business. So, and this is an organizational structure problem, which actually continues to this day. Like the siloed approach is the de facto standard in most businesses, even today. And it pains me to say so, but that's really the case. So, and what we know, right, from that pyramid that I showed you before, is that you actually, if you want to really be customer-centric, product-centric, you should put product at the center. And so when you build your organizational structure, you should have your chief product officer owning both the budget and the outcome, so that it's not distributed ownership, it's centralized ownership. And then from the CPO, you need to kind of build that organizational structure that actually deals with the research, the design, the implementation, and so on and so forth. And then you pull it all together.
Build around your desired outcome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So a question that came through, and it takes us back a little bit, but I think it's a worthwhile one. So it goes a little bit to what I was asking about, and it'll be interesting to get your thoughts on this, is when you have an organization that maybe you do that exercise, you have these categories now, and how have you helped them kind of identify what is high risk or low risk? Have you run into situations where they maybe don't have the clarity they need to really make those decisions?
Yeah, good question. So there's, the case study we talked about for the healthcare client is a good example of that. When you think about an opportunity, right, there's going to be the risk is quantified with a few criteria. So there's an investment risk. So you need to spend a certain amount of money to get it done. There's an adoption risk. So will this actually do what you anticipate it to do? So you're kind of looking at it from first execution and funding side, but then you're looking at it from a, will this do what it's supposed to do, right? We talk about digital transformation, but at the end of the day, is the product successful for the outcomes that we've designated, or is it not? So, and when you're early in that life cycle, as you were saying, and as the individual who's asking the question was asking, well, the business may not know. You're making an assumption, you're making a leap of faith that, well, yes, if we make that investment, we're hoping we're going to get that outcome. Or maybe we're even underestimating the effort size and complexity. The most effective ways to break down those barriers or get more clarity are few. One of them is rapid prototyping, which really is about taking that problem and building the really lightweight prototype.
The minimum viable
So now, that's the next layer. So the prototype, right? A prototype is not necessarily a viable product. It's just potentially it's a manifestation of a particular workflow that you're looking to validate. So as an example,
you're not even taking it to full viable.
No,
product. It's just let's just see if we can even conceptually prove this
exactly
possibility. Because,
for example, like the individual who was asking the question, we're assuming that we can use automated scheduling and by looking at the availability of the doctors and the shifts that are available. Okay, so let's not worry about security, authentication, login. Let's just say, let's get a few records into the system of, say, 50 doctors, and let's get a few data points of actual shifts that are typically keep popping up, and let's validate if we can actually conceive of an engine that does that mapping automatically.
We can pull something off that can actually accomplish that task.
Yep. Just that one isolated thing, right? And that could be, and again, I'm oversimplifying this, but that could be a prototype that validates that one assumption that is core to the success of the product.
Because if you can't pull that off, there's no point.
Exactly. Now, there's another really important element to navigating that risk, and that next important element is funding models. And this is a really big issue for companies that are not transformed or don't have their funding models worked out, is that program funding typically works in, they come in and they go, and I've seen this happen for organizations, we have $5 million and one chance to do it right. And really? Yeah, I know where that's gonna go. So now so if you have these opportunities, the better way to do this, right, is to say, listen, we have $5 million, right, in our pipeline. That's fine. But let's take $250,000 and let's assume that $250,000 is just kindling. We're going to throw it in there and see if this thing starts on fire or not.
It might not.
It may not. But then you still have your 4 million, whatever, how many now, bad at math. But that is a much better way to do funding, because you eliminate the risk and you sequence out the funding. And by the way, here I'll show you one more thing.
While you're pulling that up,
Mm-hmm.
Something that I had started years ago was, I called it my incubator, and it was a similar type thing where it's like, rather than trying to bet the farm on one transformation, and to your point, I'm still chuckling at your leaning into the camera, but
yeah,
right, this is it. This is our one shot.
No,
if it doesn't work, we're doomed. Saying, let's have like an incubator where we're incrementally tossing things and seeing what happens. And you know what? Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But what we learn from that actually helps inform and drive us forward.
Yeah. Dude, I've literally been in war rooms where, the executive team established a war room and they go into the war room and it's all NDA. Like the thing is not even built yet and it's all NDA. Like there's a separate locking key for the room because there's brilliant ideas on those walls. And they talk about this one hit chance of getting it right. So anyway, back to the original concept, right? Like this is an example of adoption.
I'm going to make that clip. I'm going to make that a clip because that was quite possibly, there's tons of value in this conversation, but if people can take, I mean, you can take a lot from this, but honestly, that is such an important thing because that does happen. It happens.
Yeah.
We're laughing about it, but it happens where it's like, this is the one shot. We've watched too many Hollywood movies where it's like,
Yeah.
this is it. If we don't do it, we're done.
And there's so many negatives from that too, right? Because the moment you say that, your whole team goes, oh shit. Like if I make any decisions at all now, I'm doomed. No matter what decision
Nobody's
I make.
going to want to take risks.
No,
Nobody's going to want to try anything that's actually going to change anything that might work or might not, because you just basically told them, this is it. If this fails, you're dead. Like, that's exactly it. Like, I don't want to be the one to make a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's and you know, back to our funding discussion, right? And kind of using metrics to justify funding. That's really the ideal state. We call it micro funding, and you go micro funding until you validate a particular concept. And then this is actually real metrics that we pulled from that medical client. And then we looked at metrics over time. So we looked at the metrics of adoption of a particular product over time, and we took this to the board and we said, listen, at week 27. We're seeing the following adoption from a group of doctors that are in the platform. There's definitely positive trending. Will you justify additional investment of $1 million to productize and build this further, right? So it's this incremental risk management using product analytics and product metrics that really leads to positive outcomes and leads to, again, in instances, as the question was posed, sometimes you want to kill your product, and that's okay. But hopefully you're doing that in the early stages of that.
In the early stages before you've done this.
Yeah.
You know, and what's funny about it on the learning side, I've got a good example of where we did this, where we followed the very similar model, where one of the things was we wanted to showcase, could we quantifiably change behavior for the better using technical tools, right? How could we do that? And we did a very similar approach where we had the prototype to even see, can we even do this? Once we prove that, we did a small kind of piece. Let's not do this enterprise. Now, granted, it didn't go quite according to plan, because I think in the organization I was with at the time, once they saw like there was some hope, they just dumped it and said like, let's do the whole thing. And
yeah. We've been in that state.
Personally, I'm curious your thoughts on that. But personally, whenever that's happened, I feel like it hasn't gone well because we didn't necessarily have the time to make sure we validated and figured out why. It was just like, oh, well, we had this one win. That doesn't mean we should go whole scale and now it's time to throw the $5 million on it, because we still haven't learned enough to know the right way and all of that yet.
Yeah, we call it the Death Star mentality, right? So because it's like, well, you know, it looks like it's going to be cool. Let's wait until it goes to production and really build out the capabilities, right? And then you end up baking in unforgivable flaws into your product,
right?
As in the case of the Death Star, right? There's a certain tunnel that got baked into that design. So that's happened. Actually, that's happened at another bank that we worked with, where we built an automated loan underwriting and decisioning engine for them. And the moment they saw this thing work in a very limited capacity for like small business loans, they're like, we're putting everything in this thing, right? And then it went like,
go for it. Make this thing enterprise.
Now, guess whether that thing went to market on time? Of course it didn't, right? And it got like over-engineered, over-designed. Anyway, so yeah, you're 100% on point. When you're building these products and when you're building your strategy for either transformation or, and actually, really good point, these initial bets, you really want to make them small because you want to create demonstrated success in the market and then to build the momentum on top of them, as opposed to show some kind of a prototype internally and then not release anything for the longest time. Because again, if it's in production, if it's in customers' hands, it is real. Then the CEO sees it, the business sees it. And actually what happens, internal teams, the moment that they see this being successful, they want to be part of those teams. They want to use that same tech. They want to use the new process.
It goes back to the change management side, right? These other components that actually lead to successful digital transformation is you're actually building the momentum, the sponsorship, the activity that you need to actually have this be sustainable and carry through.
Yeah, because again, you know, back to our discussion of this is going to be uncomfortable. People don't want change. People are threatened by it. people's livelihoods are threatened by it, because any change has a possibility of you not fitting into the new model, right? But
I
the
don't
moment that
belong here anymore.
yeah, but the moment that you demonstrate that, no, listen, you can exist in this new alternative state in the future, because look, there's other teams that did this, they're successful, they just launched a product in 6 months, they're being celebrated now.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the people that are on the other side of the fence, they go, you know what, maybe that alternative future is actually not a bad state at all.
It's not as bad as we thought. Well, and it actually, Hilton had made that comment earlier in the show where, right, people, they don't want change without context or understanding this. And again, they want to be able to feel safe. And this is a good way to do that, because you can say, hey, see, this group did this. This is how it worked. All these fears, because when people don't know what they fill in the void, it's not usually good stuff.
Yeah, of course.
So this allows you to then fill those gaps with viable information and real tangible things that showcase, hey, see, this isn't as horrible as you thought. But I love your Death Star. See, I'm going to have all sorts of new but it's true. And I think it's a natural tendency. It's a natural tendency, even if you're on that side where you get some of those early quick wins.
Yeah.
It's like winning the slot machine. What's your natural tendency? You want to just pour more of your coins back into it, thinking like, we got to win. Let's try and do it again. And you almost have to fight against that and say, but we haven't quite worked out all the kinks yet. That's great. We have a win. Let's continue building and iterating and growing on that, not just dive headlong.
Yeah. And it's even, another aspect that I've seen actually play out is people will be reluctant to launch, like actual production launch, because they're afraid that it will be lacking something. And so they'll have this completionist mentality where they'll go, well, we have this edge case with this other customer, and if the new product that we launch, if it doesn't do what the customer needs, we're going to lose them. But the reality of this is, right, if you can build, so talk about customer trust now for a second. If you can show your customers that you are able to launch a new product, the product has evidence of being better for the customer, but maybe it doesn't have all the features, but you also can demonstrate that you have the velocity to be able to release these features in a predictable manner. And one thing that we recommend to all of our clients is make your product roadmap public, because it creates a commitment both ways. It creates a commitment to your customer, and from a customer, it creates affinity and positive feelings because they see what's coming, right? They know that their promises are actually being met. So there's when we talk about trust, there's other level of trust. And so lastly, people just need to jump off that cliff. The moment that product has a certain set of features that can be launched into market, just launch it into market, because there's so many things you don't know that you will learn from this build, measure, learn loop the moment the product is out in your customer's hands.
And I think this is right. So we talked a little bit about how to do this and not get out over your skis or snowboard. Right. So there's that side. But what you hit on there is the flip side of that, which is there's also this, and I see this happen a lot, is perfection is the enemy of progress. And there's this fear of, well, but we haven't accounted for everything, or we haven't thought of every possible outcome. And let's just wait. Let's keep iterating and stewing on this. And where I've seen that just go horribly south is you miss your window of opportunities. I mean, I've seen that more than once, where you have a striking opportunity and you say, if we could solve this problem now, this is going to accelerate the transformation, because it actually is going to fix a problem that really is on the top of everybody's priority list. Well, then you sit and stew on it for too long. Suddenly that falls off the back burner. You come out later and go, ta-da. And well, it's not really that big anymore. And I think that's another risk. So how do you help strike that balance? Because there is the balance of, you don't want to go too fast that you end up pushing out something that's not mature enough and actually has an adverse effect. You also don't want to wait too long and now you miss your window of opportunity, or you end up iterating on features that really you would have been fine.
So I think, we should talk about one of the underpinnings of any product and customer-centric organization. And that underpinning is the build, measure, learn loop, right? And it's the foundational process in any agile methodology. But the idea is that you need to be able, as you're building, you need to be able to measure what you've built in some way or form, whether it's with a customer, internal audience, et cetera, et cetera. You need to learn from that process, and then you need to revise and pivot the way that you're actually building. And what is intrinsically true for any product strategy, any large program, is that you know only so much of the overall journey that will have to happen, and any attempt to define the whole journey and lock in the whole journey is predestined to complete failure. So the essence of Agile and the essence of the build, measure, learn loop is that you're saying, listen, I know what my perspective is. I want to go from here to here. Sorry, to here. But I don't necessarily know the path. And the path could be going like this to get to that destination. But we have the processes and the tools. Sorry, my son's in the room. He's playing games. Yeah.
Mine almost came in, so you're fine.
Yeah. But the path from the origin to the destination is going to be defined by a self-informed team that is going to use product analytics to govern where that journey actually goes.
What the pathway actually looks like.
Yep. And so that's why, when you think about these things, when you think about decisioning, when you think about what is the right time, when you should launch, you really, really need to rely on product analytics. And I'll show you.
And then as you're pulling that up, I think what you're getting at, and I think this is a really important point with this, is it's important to know where you are and where you want to get to. But what you're getting at is trying to say, and what is that exact path going to be along the way, is a fool's errand.
It's a fool's errand.
You're doomed to failure, and actually trying to map all that out ahead of time, you just can't. And that, again, goes back to that other point where it makes it, I personally have found, it makes it actually harder for people to adapt, because they're like, well, but this is what we said. This is what the path was supposed to look like. Versus saying, no, we're on a trajectory to get here, and we know that's the North Star we're marching towards, but we're going to have to figure out what the pathway to get there looks like as we go.
Yeah. And so I'll give you an example, right? You see the slide on the screen probably, but there's three categories of metrics that we typically will use on a product. And the most important metric that should govern the way that you build and the way that you take things to market is the product goals. And so this is also known in the industry as the product charter or product objectives. But for example, you may make a claim that we're going to automatically underwrite 80% of all small business loans that are going to come into the bank. And so your guiding principle, your North Star, is that automation. And you may select, for example, we're only going to look at really low risk loans as the first stage. My first metric that I'll use is for small business loans of under $100,000. We're going to be able to underwrite those, right? And that's a subset of the product metric. So that's central, and that should be your guiding principle of how to take something to market. Then on the peripheries, you have your delivery metrics and you have your quality metrics. And those really govern, the delivery metrics govern your predictability in go to market. So knowing what our velocity is within the team, how predictable are we in terms of taking the next iteration of this underwriting product to market in a month, right? That creates that, as I was mentioning, that faith for the customer and for the executive team. And then on the other side, you have your quality metrics, which is really the hygiene of, are you actually building software that is evergreen and sustainable long term? Are you proactively managing your defect prevention strategy? Are you thinking about defect prevention? And are you thinking about your performance metrics and things like that? So if you take the system of metrics, really it should be sufficient for you to make those decisions that you were asking about. Go to market, wait a little bit, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, got it. Well, and I think this conversation has been exceptionally valuable, because these things are all transferable, because the reality is these types of transformations, it's not necessarily just about,
it's not about technology
product. It's not. It's
no.
This approach and this framework can be applied to any major scale transformation an organization is trying to drive.
It's funny, we talk in the team and we say, when we discuss with clients and they go, well, you guys are really experts at the tech stuff. Like, listen, like It's complex, but don't get us wrong. The simplest part of this whole equation is the tech.
Yep.
The most complex thing is the people and the process, and getting the culture and understanding and the values, and people to step over their discomfort and embrace change. And so absolutely, the technology is the simplest, piece. And I agree with you that, this kind of change management, or in general, the adoption of the new things, it's applicable to any industry. It's not just about getting a new product out the door.
Well, and it goes back to I think in one of the posts I made about our conversation coming up, this is why you see so many digital transformations fail across the board, is that there's this underlying assumption, or this thing people are operating against, that the tech is the transformation. And so if we find the right tech, if we build the right app, if we do this, that is going to make for a successful transformation. And to your point, that's, again, it's not easy, but it's the easiest part of all this other stuff. And again, getting all those other pieces figured out.
Yeah.
If you don't get those other pieces figured out, you can have the perfect product. It's still not going to work. And well, it won't be the perfect product because it won't actually address all these other pieces.
Yeah. I'll show you guys one more thing, because I think you'll get a kick out of this.
Probably not as much as the boardroom $5 million, or we're all gonna die.
I have other impersonations that I can do later on. Well, one thing, I just wanted to show you, because I think this is unique in the industry. And so we're obviously a technology consultancy, right? But one of the things that we do is we run complete transparency on all of the activities that we take inside of the team. So all of our contributors on the project, whether it's a product manager, a designer, an engineer, they track their time into our systems, and then we visualize it to our clients. So this is we call it the DevBridge Power Up app. And we show a lot of those. You remember the metric slide that I showed you?
Yep.
We showed a lot of those metrics down to activity of an individual to our clients, because what we are trying to do with this, back to change management, is we're trying to show and reduce the level of threat that people feel from a new way of working, right? So complete transparency and complete open book running of product is the end state. We want our clients to adopt this. We even want them to show their data inside of this platform so that it becomes less threatening. So people are not afraid to fail. They're not afraid to actually show what they're doing, to make mistakes, and and report the metrics of product. But it's you need to have that in there for the adoption to work.
Okay. Well, this has been more than fun, way more than fun. I don't think I've laughed this much in an episode for quite a while. So, but again, also super informative. I think this was, for anybody watching, it doesn't matter what your role is or what your focus is or what industry you're in. Every single thing we talked about here is perfectly transferable to whatever you're trying to say. Any sort of transformation you're trying to drive, any major change that you're trying to do. So I appreciate you taking the time, Aurimas, especially given the fact you're out in Colorado finishing up your vacation. But this was a fantastic discussion. I think you've brought a lot of insight and value to how people can think about this. So thank you for the time.
Thanks for having me.
Trip back to Chicago. It's pretty cold here, so you might want to extend your trip a little bit if possible.
I know. It's funny, but we're in the mountains and it's like 30 degrees out here, right? And I looked at the weather in Chicago. I'm like, holy,
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for watching. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next week.